I'm curious, Polnareff. Have you ever wondered what the human soul desires most? Peace of mind.
In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Dio is more than just an iconic villain. He's the blueprint for evil itself. When he tells Polnareff that all people want is peace of mind, he isn't being profound. He's revealing a fatal flaw in his own outlook, the desire to avoid life difficulty and to take the path of least psychological resistance, even if that means harming others in the process. For Dio, peace comes not from harmony but from domination, from elevating himself above humanity and offering others the false comfort of submission. It's the peace of a false god, and he's not alone. The villains of JoJo pursue personal peace of mind at any cost, even if it means destabilizing the very world around them. The heroes, by contrast, reject that kind of mental ease. They endure hardship, ambiguity, and loss, not for comfort, but for righteousness. Araki's villains crave the inner stillness that peace of mind provides, no matter the cost to others. The heroes do reach a sort of peace of mind towards the end of the story, but it doesn't come from them chasing it for the sake of their own satisfaction. It comes from staying true to themselves by acting righteously. Araki's heroes fight for a world that's worth living in, even when it's impossible. It's in this contrast where the moral heart of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure lies. At the very outset of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Dio can be seen doing whatever he can to overcome his unfortunate circumstances in Victorian England. At first, he might just seem needlessly spiteful, but behind that cruelty is a warped psychology forged in the struggle to survive a terrible start in life. Born into poverty under an abusive drunk, Dio was given nothing but bitterness and pain. He had the light of his mother, but she passed away due to his father's abuse. And from that pain came a simple truth. He would never have peace of mind as long as he was beneath anybody. So he made a choice, not to nobly endure this pain, but to rise and crush everyone above him until the only thing he had to worry about is how to wield his newfound power and influence. His war against Jonathan Joestar wasn't about rivalry at the start. It was about spiritual survival. If Jonathan, who was born into privilege and love, could be better than him, stronger than him, and more loved than him, then Dio would never be at peace. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to erase the very idea that someone else could stand above him, and Jonathan was the perfect symbol of the world that Dio hated. The stone mask ended up giving Dio the power to do that, but it also froze him in place, emotionally and psychologically. He was immortal, but he was also forever robbed of the humanity that can lead one to grow and ultimately overcome their petty insecurities and personal desires. In the end, it's Jonathan's humanity, the very thing that Dio despised from the start, that overcomes him. Even in death, Dio refuses to face life's uncertainty, clinging to Jonathan's body for another chance at control, and that's how his first life ends. Decapitated, powerless, and unable to let go.
こいつ死んでいる。
Now, if Dio sought peace of mind by conquering others, the inventor of the stone mask, Kars, sought it by conquering nature itself. Among the Pillar Men, Kars was different, not just in how brilliant he was, but in his refusal to accept the limitations of his race's existence. While his people had adapted to avoiding the sun out of necessity, Kars wanted more. He wanted freedom from all weakness, not just his own, but his species. He saw vulnerability as a disorder, and suffered because no one understood what he thought was so clear. And so, to bring his mind to rest, Kars resolved to create the perfect life form out of his own species, no matter what anybody else thought. This wasn't an evolution, though. It was a sort of tyranny over nature, in how ecologically unsustainable his newfound power would make him. This was something that the other Pillar Men saw, and they started an all-out war to end his ambitions. And like all tyrants in JoJo's, Kars destroyed everything around him in the name of peace of mind. In chasing perfection, Kars doomed his own kind. He murdered almost all of his peers, along with AC/DC, and after acquiring the Redstone of Asia, he became unstoppable and immune to death, decay, and time itself. But in that very perfection, he found the second most ironic punishment in JoJo: stillness, a mind without challenge, a soul without purpose, drifting endlessly in space with nothing left to conquer. In the end, Kars found peace of mind, but not in his triumph over nature, but in isolation. He had no more fear or pain, or any meaning to be found at all.
Kars は二度と地球へは戻れなかった。
After spending a century in a coffin at the bottom of the ocean, Dio didn't just return with a new body, he returned with a new philosophy, a vision of heaven. His time in darkness had warped his megalomania into his own kind of theology. He didn't just want to conquer others anymore, he wanted to liberate them through psychological submission. It was his warped way of growing after his continual defeat to Jonathan. And in the coffin, Dio reflected on his defeat and came to believe that previously he'd been driven merely by petty desires of relative supremacy, something born of his will for a peace of mind. But now he believed that he had a grander design that was far more mature than his previous endeavor. Dio now came to believe that the truest peace of mind could only be found in total submission of all, and so he set out to become a god through the destruction of the Joestar bloodline and attaining heaven. In Part 6, Dio tells Pucci that through attaining heaven, humans can find peace, and it seems that he truly believes that. But it's likely that this was another extension of Dio's narcissism, because he believes that heaven will give him ultimate power, which will thus grant him the strength to allow people that ultimate peace of mind that he believes they deeply crave. But his heaven wasn't really paradise. It was the same will to control others for his own peace of mind that he had as a child back in England. It would be a place where Dio had absolute control and could act alone, just like his stand power, the world. Dio claims to offer peace of mind. However, this isn't the same thing as determination that comes from righteous action or instinct. It's submission to something higher to dispel negative feelings and uncertainty. Dio is finding a new way to justify the same impulse that once made him poison a man for power, and tries to cloak it in a sort of metaphysics. To Dio, peace of mind is no longer something he believes himself to be subject to, but something that he can use to command loyalty. He offers it to others, but only through him, and through obedience to him. The new role he adopts is that of a false god. As a false god, Dio builds a church of worshippers who believe in his power, and he inspires devotion through his charisma and his vision of heaven. But, in the end, his final fight with Jotaro proves that he never overcame anything, and all that remains is the same hateful and power-obsessed freak that he was back in Victorian England. Dio's personal idea of peace of mind required an insane level of ambition and control. By contrast, Yoshikage Kira's idea of peace of mind was a lot more reasonable. He didn't seek conquest, followers, or even any kind of admiration. His goal was a lot more modest: a quiet life. A peaceful, uninterrupted routine, a world without friction, change, or challenge. It might seem like an agreeable thing to get behind, and hardly villainous, but his personal desires and routine within his simplicity are what makes for a really warped mentality. To maintain his own peace of mind, Kira needs to be able to pursue his own chirophilic passion. That means love for hands. I just looked that up too, don't worry. He needed the hands of women, and so he was willing to kill to fulfill this desire. But this is the exact thing that made his lifestyle incredibly destructive and unsustainable. Killer Queen is a reflection of both his destructive desires and his deep desire to entirely eliminate things that can expose him and end his own version of a peaceful life. In this way, Kira doesn't really pursue a life of peace. He wants to pursue a destructive life without any interruptions or complications. Where Dio offered a false god serenity, Kira builds a false normalcy. A world where he seems to be a stand-up citizen, but he has no value for life or the connections that he holds living in a small town. Kira doesn't seek to change the world or seize control. He just wants to be able to act without impunity in his small corner of it, where nothing threatens his routine, where he can feel safe, indulged, and undisturbed. And just like Dio and cars before him, Kira's peace of mind comes at the expense of everyone else's. He believes that his right to psychological stillness is a lot more important than anyone's right to live in peace. But his shot at a peaceful life bites the dust in an instant. The care and connection of Morio all unite to end his murderous spree, and in the end, the man who wanted to live quietly dies pretty violently with his head crushed in the street and exposed before everyone he tried to hide from. Yoshikage Kira wanted peace through hiding in plain sight, but Diavolo goes even further. He doesn't want to be seen at all. His peace of mind can't merely be reached with Dio's control or Kira's comfort of routine. It's about becoming untouchable through complete erasure. The complete erasure of his past, his identity, and of time itself. Diavolo doesn't just want to rule Passione. He wants to be untouchable. His entire existence is built on fear. That fear of being known, a fear of vulnerability, and a fear of losing control. King Crimson, his stand, reflects his pathology perfectly. His stand predicts the future and can erase any result that Diavolo finds to be undesirable. Diavolo doesn't want to face consequences or uncertainty. He wants a world where no one can challenge him or even reach him, where his power as boss gives him perfect mental safety. But, in trying to secure an eternal peace of mind by erasing every trace of himself, he divorces himself from the truth of the world. Results can only truly come about and persist through the actions that were taken to get them. He then gets the crown for the most ironic punishment ever of having to suffer death for all eternity without ever reaching the result of the end. For the sake of Diavolo's peace of mind, he is willing to do whatever it takes to retain his desired result of being the king of the criminal underworld. And it's this desire that causes him to never reach the truth. Since Dio is a sort of false god that sets the standard for evil within the original run of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it should be obvious that Enrico Pucci serves as his final prophet. But unlike Dio, Pucci doesn't seek peace of mind by elevating himself above others. He wants to equally give the peace of mind that he seeks to the entire world. Pucci failed to break up his estranged brother Weather Report and his sister Perla, a failure that led to his beloved sister's death and left Pucci consumed by guilt. He doesn't accept this as a failure of character or fate. He sees it as a flaw in the structure of reality itself. Instead of lamenting his failure to his sister that caused her to commit suicide, Pucci instead fixates on the fact that he had to encounter such a fate without knowing what would come next. And if only he would have known his fate, then he could have come to terms with the reality that his sister had to die. And so he wants to impose this on everyone else. He devotes his life to fixing this, to building a heaven where no one will ever suffer the agony of uncertainty again. Guided by Dio's philosophy, Pucci embraces a pretty terrible idea. That true peace of mind can only be found when humans know everything that will happen to them, when fate is revealed and doubt is destroyed. In his vision, every tragedy, every loss, and every failure becomes bearable because it was meant to be, and you knew that from the very outset. But this peace of mind is something that's based on his regrets and his failings. If only Pucci could have come to terms with what had to happen, then he wouldn't be so torn up inside. The reality is that Pucci is using his goal of heaven as a coping mechanism for his failure and imposing that on everyone else. There are real trade-offs to knowing your fate. While the idea of resigning yourself to what has to be might seem comforting and offering peace of mind, it also eliminates hope and the belief in agency. Pucci isn't really improving the world, he's trying to break it and rebuild it around a single truth, that suffering becomes tolerable when you remove agency. that peace comes not from justice or love or strength, but from simply knowing that you can't escape what's coming. And in the end, Pucci fails once he comes face to face with the reality of his past in the form of his brother Stan weather report. His brother Stan ends up undoing all of his work and allows for uncertainty once more upon the final resetting of the universe.
Don't you?
As we all know by this point, Part 7 and onward of JoJo's takes place in an entirely different universe, and thus leaves the major themes and concepts of the original universe largely behind. Where the first universe had a fixation on the psychological interaction between the inherent nobility of the Joestar bloodline and the villain's selfish pursuit of peace of mind, the new universe brings in more ideological frameworks for villains like Funny Valentine and Toru. JoJo's will always be JoJo's, and so some motifs and concepts remain in different forms, but Araki's focus moves on to something a little more complicated when it comes to the motivations and philosophies of his villains in the new universe. And I, for one, am excited to see what the real uniting thread of the Steel Ball Run universe is once Part 9 is completed. Across 6 parts and countless battles, the villains of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure chase a peace of mind and lose themselves in the very process of it. Araki has said that he wanted JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to be an ode to humanity and a celebration of how people endure, adapt, and triumph against overwhelming odds. Seen this way, it's no surprise that his villains are those who reject humanity's struggles, seeking false forms of mental peace instead. The heroes, in contrast, embrace these struggles, and it's through them that they find meaning and a true peace of mind. Jonathan exemplifies this as the start of the Joestar bloodline. No matter how insurmountable his fight against Dio seems, he always rises to the occasion to be the righteousness that he wants to see in the world. This noble will to grow and to rise to the occasion to combat injustice is something that passes on from Joseph all the way down to Jolene and unites these seemingly disparate protagonists. And alternatively, the ignoble will to pursue your goals at the expense of others will always bring ruin, just as it did in the cases of all 6 antagonists of the original saga. A question that plagues most everyone in the modern world is how they can find happiness in their lives. It's a question that I definitely can't answer for you, but I think JoJo shows that chasing happiness, a sort of peace of mind itself, won't get you there. Purposeful living that you have to struggle and strive for seems to be a better path to it. As the philosopher Nietzsche says, he who has a why can bear almost any how. And as JoJo's shows, in struggling and growing to reach for something that we believe in, we don't find immediate comfort, but instead meaning. And in doing so, we might be able to find a true persistent source of happiness.